My name is NettaMarshall, and I'm a San Francisco-based UI and visual designer. Over my career, I've worked for a number of companies ranging from huge corporations to tiny startups. And now I lead design for a nonprofit called WOTC. WOTC is a global crowdfunding platform that allows anyone to donate as little as $5 to help fund life-changing medical care for people around the world. I've always been interested in helping people. When I was a kid, my parents tried to make sure I had some general awareness that there were people in the world who needed help. We would either donate our time to food banks or clear out our closets and donate things to charity. And the private school that I attended tried to do much of the same. We hosted lots of outreach programs. We would host bake sales and donate the proceeds to those less fortunate. And as a busy adult, this desire to do good stuck with me, but I unfortunately never made much time for it. I remember my very first international trip. I was going to Belize for about a week, and before leaving, people wished me well. They told me to be careful since I was traveling alone. And a couple of people told me that rum was cheaper than water, which I did not believe for a second. I mean, how could that even be true? But I got there, and sure enough, water was about double the price as a bottle of rum, and I was completely taken aback. I mean, I wanted to help the situation somehow, but I had no idea where to start or how to help. Like most of us, I swiftly got caught up in the whirlwind that is life, and the issue fell by the wayside. In the spring of 2011, I landed a job at Square on the design team. And as part of the onboarding process, Jack Dorsey would come by and collect $1 from every new hire. And he would use your signature screen and your intro in a weekly meeting called Town Square. So I was sitting in Town Square, my first Friday at Square, and unbeknownst to me, I was the 100th employee. So Jack made a joke that he was coming back at some point for his remaining $99. And I blew it off. I told him, I have no idea where this money's going to go. You're never going to get it. And he remembered that. And a couple weeks later, he showed a video in Town Square from Charity Water, which is where all of the new hire funds are donated to. And it outlined that there are over 700 million people in the world who don't have access to clean water. I was so moved by this video that I even cried a little bit into my beer at that Town Square. But afterwards, I ran over to Jack and I said, hey, I'm going to donate my remaining $99, and I also gave him a $50 tip. Moving on from Square, I worked for Ardio for about a year, and then I freelanced for a little bit. And it was then that I realized just how magical of a place San Francisco and Silicon Valley is. I mean, if I want someone to come to my house and install a shelving system, I can have that. If I want all of my groceries delivered to my front door, I can have that. With the press of a button on my phone, I can have a car show up and take me anywhere I want to go. If I want someone to come to my house, pick up my dirty laundry, bring back my laundry neatly folded in a box, I can have that. In many ways, San Francisco is a place where ideas for the privileged are bred. But what about those who aren't so lucky? Design has the biggest potential for impact in the nonprofit space, but why is it that so much of the world's design power goes elsewhere? It was at this time that I decided that I wanted to dedicate my time to something bigger than myself, for real this time. So I wrote my friend Gary Tan, who is a partner at Y Combinator, an email, and I said, hey, I'm looking for a job. 3 requirements. Has to be a super small team. They have to be working on something amazing. And if it's a nonprofit, even better. He introduced me to Chase Adam, who had the original idea for WOTC. We had breakfast that next morning. I met the rest of the team that afternoon, and I was hired that night. I think Chase's question to me was, so do you want to come with us to Nepal in 3 weeks or what? No nonprofit, to my knowledge, moves that quickly, so I had a pretty good feeling about what was ahead. So I started at WotC a few weeks later, and I just spent some time getting my feet wet, getting to know the product, the brand, the voice, the donor base, the priorities. And at the beginning of my third week, I was on a plane to Nepal with the rest of the team. We were visiting our very first medical partner located in Acham, which is a far western district of Nepal. Now, getting there wasn't exactly easy. We, after flying into Kathmandu, took a short additional flight into a small town about an hour away, followed by an 11-hour Jeep ride through windy, bumpy, often unpaved mountainous roads. Now, keep in mind, we were in large Jeeps with seat belts and windows that rolled down and plenty of space if you wanted to fall asleep. We could do that. But if you were a little kid with a broken leg, you would be traveling on those very same roads for 11 hours on a crowded bus. That was pretty much our first dose of perspective. So we finally arrived at Biopata Hospital, which is where Possible Health operates. And we got a tour of the grounds, but we were super eager to see things in action. So the 6 of us piled into a tiny patient interview room, sitting along the floor on these floor cushions, and we met Hari, and I will never forget Hari's story. Hari is a 15-year-old boy who lived at home with his parents and his siblings, but unfortunately, due to the economic situations, he had to drop out of school and move away and seek work as a construction laborer. He had been living with an ear infection for years, but the pain started to become more constant. His hearing was impaired, and he was starting to have fevers, but the cost of care is more than he would earn in years. He had been brought into the hospital by someone he worked for, and just in time. Doctors said that if he had let it go any longer, it would have rendered him deaf. He was so happy and so grateful to know that he could have treatment for something he had been living with for so long at absolutely no charge to him. My coworker Thomas was sitting on the floor next to me, and he turned to his left and said, "Have you ever done user testing like this before?" I whispered no as I fought the tears, and it was that moment that I realized the opportunity I had been granted. I wanted to make WotC the absolute best crowdfunding platform out there. So when we got back to the States, I started working on our redesign, which went live to everyone last week. That redesign was about a year in the making, end to end, and we scoped it to be one-to-one, no new features. We knew that we had to do it. We wanted a better foundation to build on top of so that we could launch the products and features that we thought were valuable to our donor base. We wanted to make the site more image-driven, so we increased the size of all of our patient photos across the site, and we introduced a series of heroes on a few pages to introduce a bit of visual appeal. Now, this even goes as far as our 404 and our 500 pages, which can sometimes be forgotten about. We even used a series of photos gathered at one of our trips earlier this year to Kenya and Tanzania to better tell the story of how WotC works. Presenting a compelling and emotional narrative appealing to everyone can often be challenging, but also very rewarding. We put a lot of time and effort into what our brand represents, how we've showcased it visually, and what our voice is. At WotC, we see design as a necessity, not a luxury. We put design first and strive to have everything we produce and present to the world be beautiful and memorable. From our marketing imagery, to our copy, to our site interactions. And not enough nonprofits do this. In fact, very few think that design is actually worth investing in. We want to be as upfront as possible. We make a concerted effort to make transparency a priority. Across the site, you'll find numerous mentions of our transparency document, which is an encapsulated place for all of our financials, our funds transfer screenshots to our medical partners, and updates on patients. It's our goal to clearly communicate that WOTC donates 100% of funds to the medical partners for life-saving treatments. We never, ever, under no circumstances, take a cut. WOTC is similar to for-profits in a number of ways. We strive to be innovative, we move fast, and we make sure that we place high value on design. Our sense of urgency isn't necessarily a competitor with a similar product or VCs breathing down our neck. It's lives, human lives that need saving. And that's more than enough motivation for us to get shit done. Over the past year, I've realized that one of the biggest differences with working for a nonprofit is that our goals and our culture are completely different. We're not selling a product or services or goods. We're trying to get people to make a genuine connection with patients. We want our donors, both existing and potential, to feel happiness and empowerment when they visit the site, like they're part of a movement, part of a solution. Now, if you've ever been watching television in the late night hours, you might see commercials from nonprofits who often portray the problem that needs solving versus the outcome that is possible. They often ask people to prevent a problem from continuing versus being a part of something incredible. And that's the reason why you might see so many bright, smiling, happy faces on WOTC and why the stories are so rich, lively, and relatable. I was actually born with a fairly common condition. I had a herniated navel. Tons of babies are born with this. It's basically a protrusion of the navel, and it usually corrects itself within the first few years of life, but for whatever reason, my doctor became concerned with mine and suggested that I have corrective surgery at the age of 1. So whenever I see these cases on WOTC, it hits me a little bit closer to home, and I'm more inclined to donate to them. Same with atrial septal defect. My kid's sister was born with this, and it's basically a hole in the upper 2 chambers of the heart. It usually closes during pregnancy or shortly after birth, but hers didn't. So some of her blood pumped from her heart to her lungs in a loop instead of oxygen-rich blood flowing to her body. She too had surgery when she was 1, so whenever I see these cases on WOTC, I connect and I donate. And it's not just the conditions that I connect with. Sometimes I just want to help a kid grow up and fulfill his or her dreams or give sight back to a grandparent. I love working at WOTC. I've been a designer since I was 18, and I've worked on some incredible products with some incredible people, but I've never really had this sense of fulfillment that I do and this constant perspective in life. I remember once I was having a bad day. It was pouring, raining, and I couldn't get a ride home. There were no Ubers or whatever. The buses were slow, and they were packed by the time they actually got to me. So I said, screw it, I'm just going to walk home. So walk home, and I'm super tired and really hungry by the time I get there, and no food. So I'm eating ramen, which sucks, but it's what I had. And I decided to hop on WOTC and read a few stories. And I found one profile of a 7-year-old girl named Nalari who had just been fully funded, and she had the most incredible story I had ever heard. She's 7, and she was burned really badly in a house fire. She lost her 2 parents and her 5 siblings. She was the only survivor. And she had scar tissue that built on her left arm, which limited her mobility. But you know what? She was still smiling in her photo. And I realized, I don't have it so bad. My life is actually pretty good. Things could be so much worse for me. I try to be really cognizant of complaining about first world issues, but I think that's increased so much more since working at WOTC. We took a trip to Kenya and Tanzania March of this year, and we got a brief chance to meet Nolari, and she was still that happy kid that you see in the photos. And I was so moved that I had to sneak off for a bit to prevent the tears. On a separate trip to Cambodia recently, we visited a partner who also has an on-site eye clinic. It's mostly elderly patients with cataracts who are having their sight restored. All of the procedures are super low cost. They're about $100. Now, for some reference, that same procedure would be $6,500 in the United States. The patients are so happy. They're able to see clearly for the first time in years. That's my favorite. But that's not the extent of your impact. When you donate, you might be helping their family members get back to school since they no longer have to help grandpa get around town. Or you might be helping out their local village because they might have a farmer who's back at work. Your contribution goes so much farther than just this one person. And it's an honor of mine to be part of a movement to provide a basic human right to people. Designers have far more power than they realize. David Berman says, "The same design that fuels mass overconsumption also holds the power to repair the world." And just to go on a brief tangent, I noticed lots of designers will pour tons of time and energy into unsolicited redesigns of things where they had no idea the brief, the constraints, the goals, how it fits into an existing framework, or if it can actually be implemented. If that same energy were spent for something good, we might be able to break this vicious cycle that is designers not spending enough time with nonprofits and nonprofits thinking design isn't worth investing in. So here's the question. If design and marketing can make people crave sugar water, or maybe persuade them to switch from one brand to another, or urge them to buy something they probably don't need, just imagine what the world could be like if you use that same time and talent for something that's legitimately world-changing. Now, when people talk about design changing the world, it tends to sound a bit grand, and I don't mean in one fell swoop. What I mean is design can solve problems on a case-by-case basis around the world. And with that, it changes the reality for the people who live where that situation is happening. And that's the reason that I value design so much. What I hope to leave behind with our generation is the notion that giving and helping others can be cool, and designing for a nonprofit doesn't have to be boring. Cheers. Thanks.